Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today I'm going to show you how to draw these cocktails using art crayons. And if you'd like a real-time version of this tutorial, you can find it up now in Critique Club. Critique Club is $5 a month and you get access to over 100 real-time, more advanced tutorials than what I show on YouTube. And we do a lot of mixed media stuff, so if you love art supplies, you kind of want to see what you can do with them, Critique Club is a wonderful place for you. And it's a great supportive community too. So to start off, I used my T-square to draw a horizontal line to kind of replicate or represent where I want the tabletop to be. And then I drew some vertical lines to kind of give me places for the glasses to go and give me a little bit of aid on making them symmetrical. Now, I have to say there are some wonky times in this tutorial, but as I notice mistakes that I've made, I'm going to point them out to you so that you can identify them in your work. Sometimes when I'm working on a piece and I can see that I have that bottom, the stem of that glass on the right, a little going a little woo, it's like making a little S shape. Sometimes you don't see it when you're drawing, especially if you're working flat at a table, but when you can see a straight on like bird's eye view or dead on view, you can notice these things. So working on the easel can really help with that. Another thing that can help with this is to take a photo of your artwork and look at it, or look at it in reverse, like hold it up to a mirror and look at the reflection of it. And oftentimes you'll see those mistakes right out. Now, probably a great option would be just to draw this out on a scrap paper and then transfer it onto your art paper. But this is a pretty affordable paper, and honestly, I love to just charge in and start drawing. And the paper I'm using is the Canson XL sand grain paper, and it is my favorite paper for using with like oil pastels. Actually, this would be really great in oil pastels. So if you want to try this, but you don't have the crayons and you're not sure if you're going to like them, give it a try with oil pastels. Another tip for getting things symmetrical is turning my paper upside down, because I find that it's easier for me to draw the left-hand side of something that's symmetrical than the right-hand side. So if I draw the left-hand side and then turn it upside down, then I can draw the left-hand side again. You know what I mean? It's these little tricks that can help us kind of untwist our brains so that we can see things how they really are, or we can, it kind of, because our brains kind of will adjust for errors. It's kind of like if you have bad eyesight and you never get glasses, your brain does a lot of the seeing, more of the seeing than your eyes do. So your brain will account for that and will make up the difference. And so that's what we do when we're drawing too. Sometimes we'll draw an error and our brain will say, okay, it should be like this, and we'll make up the difference. And then we don't notice it until we look at our paintings later and we're like, oh, that's not right. That's a little off. So things like that. Those are just little tricks that I use to help me straighten things out as I'm working. And I'll have to say something else that I really enjoy is drawing all the way through my process. So this is like when I use alcohol markers, for instance. I start off with a really pale alcohol marker, or maybe even an erasable colored pencil, and I start sketching, and then I refine as I go, and I do my outlining last, my fine lining last. And I know a lot of artists will do like a pencil sketch, then fine lining, then they will do their alcohol marker. But I find that refining the drawing all the way through the process is just something that I enjoy. It's the way that I prefer to work. So you do have to be a little aware when you're working on like a paper where you don't want to get the smudges in the background, or you're working with a medium that's difficult to erase. But I actually think it worked out all right here, but that's why I left my background for last, because I knew I was going to have smudges and erases and all of that. For erasing on this paper, I use two things. I use a kneaded eraser to kind of lift up as much pigment as I can, and then I will use an electric eraser for kind of whisking off the remaining pigment without smudging. And then I have just a note cube, just scrap paper, that I will put my electric eraser on, run it on just to pull off any extra pigment, so I don't end up just smearing it all over the place, because that can happen, especially when you're using the art crayons, because they're kind of like a lot of colored pencil, and it's really waxy and it doesn't want to kind of smear. I want to talk about these art crayons a little bit. I will have a full review on these, and I'm just kind of trying to figure out at this stage of using them how I'm going to like to use them best. And I don't think this is how I'm going to like to use them best, but they are very much like a colored pencil lead. It's almost like a woodless colored pencil, but a really high quality one that's softer than other brands. Like I've used the Progresso woodless colored pencils by Koh-i-Noor before, and those are very dry and hard. These are much smoother and more crayon-like. They feel almost like like a Prismacolor lead. In fact, if you've ever used the Caran d'Ache NeoColor 1 crayons, they feel an awful lot like that. In fact, I would say if you didn't need the light fast aspect of these NeoArt crayons, you could go with a less expensive NeoColor and not really notice a difference in workability or feel. But this does have a lovely expansion in like the earth tones, in the grays, and the more muted subtle colors. So like if you're a landscape artist and you have the NeoColor ones and you'd like to expand the range, I would recommend picking up some of these. And in the review that I do, which is going to be long, there's no way I can help it, I do go into what colors are duplicated from the NeoColor 1 range and what are unique. So if you do have the NeoColor ones and you want to add on, you can do so without duplication, because the NeoColor ones actually have a pretty good light fastness rating for most colors. Their ultramarine blue has a poor light fastness rating, and I think there's the violet isn't very good, but you can replace those in the new line, which is kind of nice. But so far I'm really enjoying these crayons, and I look forward to doing a few more artworks with them before I do a review. I'm kind of like tempted. It's like, oh, I want to rush out there and get that review out. But I also don't want to rush out there because they're kind of expensive, and I don't want people to be like, oh my gosh, Lindsay loves these, I'm going to buy them, but then like not see the flaws or not see the holdbacks of because every product has, it doesn't matter how good something is, it's going to have pluses and minuses, and I don't want to waste other people's money. I'll waste my own money, sure, but I don't want to waste anybody else's, because at least it's a business expense for me, you know? So basically what I do here is I'm going back and forth with pencils and the crayons. I'm using the pencils if I just need a little sliver or a detail or an edge, but I'm doing the majority of this with the crayons, the majority of color laydown. I'm working on this textured surface, so I can go over with the colored pencils. I think if you were on a really smooth surface, you may struggle to go over with colored pencils onto this. But you know, like I said, we all have our preferences, so try out the papers that you like and see what works best for you. And you can buy these open stock, and they are cheaper open stock than in sets, so it makes sense just to buy a couple, see what you think, and then add on. But you do need to have enough to see if you like them. So maybe I would recommend getting like a brown, a cream, and a white, or a black, a gray and white, something like that, so you have a little bit of a range and you can work on a tone tan or tone gray paper, and you know, be able to do a full spectrum and a full piece without having to spend a ton of money. Anyway, that's just my advice. But I like just going over it with the pencils and bringing in, you know, little details. Now I'm using some wax-based Prismacolor pencils and also some just generic wax-based pencils that I have, and they worked really well with these. I almost feel like the Prismacolor, these softer wax-based pencils, stick down better on top of this than the Luminance pencils from Caran d'Ache, which match by color number, which I think they're meant to be kind of like a companion product. And I almost wonder if maybe they just took the lead from the Luminance pencils and made these into crayons, because that would make sense, because they already went through the expense of having the Luminance range tested, that if they could just make a crayon with that lead, why not, if it performs well. Although when I was in there with one of the darker blue pencils next to the pastel or the crayon, it felt like the pencil was darker, but it could just be that because it's sharp, it's laying down more concentrated pigment in one area, or it could be that they've had to add more wax to the crayons to make them glidey, and that just kind of mutes the color intensity a bit. I'm not sure, because if they added something to it, they would have to have it light fast tested, and that would add a huge expense. And these crayons are like $3.10 full price, which doesn't seem unreasonable considering the pencil, which has less usable material, and you actually sharpen some of the usable material away, is actually more expensive. So, and granted, the pencils take more, they have more labor and more cost in making them, but still, I'm surprised they're not more expensive, honestly. And I don't know if maybe it's because they're new and they're coming out at a lower price point. I don't know. But still, as far as a crayon goes, it is a very fancy, expensive crayon, and I want to do my due diligence with my review. Anyway, you can see going back and forth, doing slivers of color with whatever pencils I feel like grabbing out of my big pencil collection, and honestly, it's working great. And honestly, it's going to work great with the Luminance pencils too. And I do that a little bit towards the end, just to see how they can cope with going over thick layers of the pencil. Something else I recommend you have is just a soft brush that you can brush away crumbs with. And this could be a large watercolor wash brush that you want to dedicate to this sort of thing, because it will, if you're using it on textured paper, it is going to do some wear and tear on the brush. Or it could be like a blush brush from the dollar store, because you don't have to worry about loose hairs with this dry medium. It could be a cheap hardware store chip brush. Any of those work really well, and just have something handy because you will use it. Because if you have it handy, you're not going to run your hand across it to brush off the crumbs. And when you run your hand across it, you transfer oils from your hand, a lotion from your hand. You risk trapping a crumb between your hand and the surface and smearing it and getting streaks. So have one dedicated for this and have it with your drawing supplies so you're not tempted to brush your hand over your work. You could try to blow the crumbs away, but I find they want to cling to the paper more than like pastel, and you really shouldn't blow pastel dust either, but you shouldn't use a brush to brush away crumbs on pastels. But for the crayons, for the pencils, absolutely, I feel like it's a must-have. Right there with a kneaded eraser and an electric eraser. I really loved playing with kind of blending the colors, although I don't think that's how I'm going to use these pencils for the most part. I think I'm going to use them more for loose sketching. There I'm seeing that last glass is tipping, and I think it's because I started off with having the stem a little crooked, so then I started to cope with that by adjusting the bowl of the glass. Now the stem looks straight and the bowl of the glass looks kind of crooked or a little lopsided, but you know, as I'm always drawing and refining, I'm dealing with these things. I'm also noticing on the drawing that is the second one in from the end, the ellipse of the foot of the glass is too round. It should be much more compressed to go with the other two, or the other two should be bigger. But I honestly, what it is, well, it's probably a combination of the perspective of the camera, a kind of exaggerating the ellipses, and also just my careless drawing. So I do end up squashing that ellipse down when I go to put the background in. So I'm just kind of giving you a heads up and telling you how I'm going to deal with that in the future. I hope it's helpful. Sometimes I feel like going through, especially on a time lapse, because I know a lot of Critique Club members will watch this before they attempt the full project. I feel like this is kind of like a little armchair quarterbacking, like, well, if I had to do it again, this is what I would do. That way you kind of know what to watch for when you're doing the real-time lesson. So my technique for the background, because I do not want to be putting in dense color all in the background, that's like tedious and boring and I don't want to do it. I'm starting with a really loose scribbly sketch towards the frame of the picture, and then I am working more denser as I get towards the focal images, the subject, which I would say probably the focal point of this would be that that fancier drink with the orange slice and the apple slices. But I want kind of density towards the center horizon line area or tabletop line, and then I want it to get kind of looser and sketchier as it works out. So I'm just kind of working back and forth, making sure that I just color a little more densely as I work in. Now it is wearing the crayon down, but it's nothing exorbitant. Oh, by the way, if you remember the watercolor, those eye crayon pastels that I reviewed recently and did a tutorial on, those would work great for this. I think they'd work very well, actually. You might not be able to go back into the colored pencil, but you could use a fine brush and the pastel with that. So really any sort of pastel product you have, I think, is a waxier pastel, like a water-soluble pastel, like a watercolor crayon, or an oil pastel or water-soluble oil pastel. I think those would all just interchange beautifully for this project. And if you like the project and you're feeling like, oh, I don't want to buy that, but I want to do that, use what you have. Use whatever waxy sort of crayon-y like product you have. Heck, use a Crayola crayon if you want to. You will get more of a grainy effect because there's way more wax to pigment in like a kid's crayon, even a good kid's crayon. But you definitely could do it and have fun and get the effect and see if you like the feel, because it is a very tactile, crayon-y experience, and I know that's not for everyone. And that's half the battle. A product can be good, but if it's not good for you, if it's not your style, then it doesn't matter how good quality it is. You know, we all have different preferences. So I did use an eraser to kind of erase a little bit of the background around that fancy drink there, because I noticed that it was a little bit lopsided and I needed to push out that side just a little bit. And that's where the eraser becomes a really effective drawing tool. These erasers, they have refills you can buy for them. I would recommend when you buy an eraser, buy the refill pack too, just in case something happens and stores stop stocking it, because stores will stop stocking things if they don't sell very well. And sometimes companies discontinue things if they're not selling very well. So just to make sure you protect your investment and so that you're not left in the lurch in the middle of a project, buy a box of refills while you're at it. The Derwent erasers, I think they're around $14, and the refill packs are, I don't know, I think they're under $10. You get a lot. That would probably be a lifetime supply, honestly. You're not doing that much erasing. Especially the more experienced you get, the less you're doing, and you're using it just kind of as a drawing tool. So I definitely recommend doing that. But I've even used the $5 ones from Jerry's Artorama, the Quick Fix, and they work great. I would recommend taking the batteries out if you're not going to use them for an extended period of time, because my batteries corroded in there out of the blue on that brand. And it was too bad, because it's actually a really nice eraser. And I just get the standard one. They do have a fine tip eraser. I haven't used that one, but that might be something that you would like for doing little highlights. I haven't really found the need of it, because I can take like a sanding block, and I can I can mold the eraser into a little tip, and I can erase tiny areas or use an eraser shield. But yeah, we all have different preferences, so get what you think is going to be most useful for you. And I'm just basically layering up. I did want to get a little bit more saturation in a darker value towards the tabletop line, so I did go in with that ice blue, which is this beautiful like phthalo blue color. Oh, it's so gorgeous. And I added that around the horizon line there. And that's something that I do notice, because I think it's because colored pencil lines have so many colors, and these colors match the Luminance pencils. Rather than using like phthalo blue or kind of more the proper names, I think they have to get a little creative, because when you've got 100 color names to come up with, you know, you could use phthalo blue 10%, phthalo blue 20%, you know, and so on and so forth. But they tend to go with more, I would say, kind of romantic, bewitching names, and it can be a little confusing. And honestly, I'm usually not looking at the color name. I'm looking at the color of the lead or the color of the barrel and going that way, because pencils are small, and printing on pencils, a tiny little print, it's, you know, it takes extra time, and I work pretty quickly, so I'm just grabbing and going. So to keep my tabletop line fairly straight, I am using a piece of tape to just get a nice edge. Now, don't worry about that edge being really crisp, because it's behind your focal point and it would be a little blurred. So if it ends up a little fuzzy, that's actually a benefit. Also, if the edges of your glasses end up a little fuzzy, that's not terrible either, because on round or spherical objects, your edges will be a little bit fuzzy if the front of your image is sharp in focus. So that'll just add a little bit of a roundness and depth to them. I don't know if the focus is shallow enough here for that to be the case. I don't think it is. But just in general, if you're drawing something that's like a sphere or a cylinder, then you may end up with that, and that will actually make it look a little bit more realistic. So don't feel like you have to have everything super duper crisp, because it might actually flatten things out on you. And filling in the tabletop here, I found to be quite a challenge on this paper and with these colors, but we get there in the end. I think I was just kind of being impatient. But one thing with this Canson XL sand grain paper that I forgot about when I started this painting was that it does not deal well with wet media. And even like wet media like Gamsol, it does not deal well with Gamsol. It stains the paper. It makes the product just kind of stick and is very unpleasant. So as I was doing this, I'm like, oh, I can't use Gamsol on this. And I've got a really grainy effect that I am not loving. It looks like a coloring book page, and I don't like this. And then I was thinking, what can I use? And then I remembered, it was about a couple year or two ago, I had done this watercolor of a church door with a wreath on it. And I wanted to display it without glass. I wanted to mount it on a panel and hang it on the wall. And so I'm like, well, I need to seal this up. So I grabbed my Dorland's wax, and I forgot that I had done some colored pencil accents on that painting. And as soon as the wax hit those colored pencil accents, it was like smearing the colored pencil. And so I had to be very careful to like change my area on the rag that I was applying it, and not rub over the colored pencil areas, and and it wasn't a lot of colored pencil areas, but I had to be careful not to smear those. So then I thought, what if I use the Dorland's wax with a blending stump? Because I tried the blending stump dry first, and it blended it a little bit, but not much at all. So then I thought, I'm just going to get the Dorland's wax, put a little bit on there with my finger, and blend that out, and that worked pretty well. So that's what would be my recommendation if you're going to try this with the sand grain paper. So you could see before I was doing the blending without the Dorland's wax. This is the blending with the Dorland's wax on a stump, and I'm just putting a little bit down, and I probably have like I don't know, maybe like a pea-sized dollop of the wax, putting a little bit down, blending it out, putting a little bit down, blending it out. And that worked pretty well. And, but the thing with that is because it's kind of like Vaseline. Actually, Vaseline would probably work to blend this, but it wouldn't dry. You kind of have to wait if you want to go over it and add any crisp details. You kind of got to wait till the next day when it hardens and dries. But it will dry with that waxy finish just like the rest of the crayon will. So that's kind of handy, honestly. And I'm just kind of spreading it out because I want to get that kind of vignette effect of the sketchiness on the outside and the detail on the inside. So that's what I was going for there. And I think it worked out pretty well. I just made sure not to leave any big clumps of it because I did want to have a fairly smooth effect. Here I'm trying to go in with a pencil and crispen up the edges, but it wasn't working all that well. And then I thought maybe I want some wood grain, and I started to go in with this crayon, and I didn't like it. It wasn't working too well. But I did find that using a pencil to fill in any halo gap that I had at the horizon line worked really well, though. So I really recommend that if you do want to go over any areas, you blend it out with the Dorland's wax or cold wax medium, you let it dry first. So here I'm using some brush and pencils, a titanium white, which is ground up white colored pencil, with the touch-up texture, which is basically like a textured glue that you can brush it on anywhere on a colored pencil piece and regain tooth so you can work over it again. It like seals it, tooths it up, and then you can work on top of it. But if you mix them together, it makes an archival white paint for colored pencil work, and actually for the watercolor crayon as well. And I'll use it on oil pastel if I need to. It works really well for that. And I'm just going in and putting in those bright highlights. This is an archival product, meaning it's going to stick and bond and not going to yellow or do anything weird over time. If you don't have this and you don't want to buy it, you could try some acrylic paint. You could try some gouache. You could even try some gesso. That might work. But if you go over it with your colored pencil, it's probably going to flake off. So just a word to the wise on that. I've used gel pens before, but on such a waxy saturated surface, it's really not going to stick very well. So a fine brush and this brush and pencil product is what I would recommend. And I will link to that in the video description if you are curious about it. They also make like a fixative spray, like if you lose a tooth and you want to work over it, a textured fixative that you can use. They make a final fixative. They make a blending product for pencil, and that's actually what I was most interested in when I first heard about this company, and that's the product I use the least. But if you like to do really bright highlights on colored pencil or crayon work, I highly recommend this product. It's kind of pricey, but it will last you a long time, so I would consider that, especially if you're unhappy with your highlighting options at the moment. And I'm just going through and adding those just little slivers of highlight with a tiny brush because I don't want to get in over my head and end up doing something that's going to be difficult to fix. The foot of that glass really needs some help because it's too much of an oval. It's not an ellipse. It really needs to be more of an ellipse, even though it does look kind of ovally in the reference photo. But still, I know it's not right, and it's kind of bugging me. But that's where you leave it and you look at it the next day, and then you kind of tweak as you need to. And I also needed to add to the bottom of that glass because I kind of had it blunt for some reason, and it had a little taper to it, and I like that taper, so I wanted to put that in. And yeah, you just do a little bit of fussing around until you're happy with it. And another fun thing with this little product is I could dab in the carbonation on this little, I think it's like a champagne or a spritzer or something. It has a beautiful little bubbly effect in the inside, so I could just dab that on, and that was very satisfying to do. I love doing the highlights. Isn't that the best part, going in there and doing your highlights? I want to put a little detail on the raspberry there, and just letting the little bubbles cling to the raspberry, I think, worked pretty well. Here I'm going in with a black pencil to kind of add those really dark, crisp shadows and refractions, and to also straighten out areas where it needs to. And I'm going back and forth between the Luminance and the Prismacolor for no reason, just that I have them both, and I'm just curious to see how they both work. They both worked fine. I would say maybe Prismacolor performed a little bit better sticking over this waxy surface, but if you are really concerned about light fastness, you just want to pick and choose your Prismacolor products to make sure that you're choosing the colors that are indeed light fast. And the Color Pencil Society of America has light fast testing for all of the major brands. I would highly recommend becoming a member if you are really interested in the light fastness of colored pencils. But there you have it. I hope you enjoyed it, and check out Critique Club if you would like a real-time lesson. I'll put the links to that as well as all the supplies I used in the video description. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.